Hi everyone, I'm Rob King. Welcome to Homebrew number 38. This is in honour of the Olympics taking place in France right now, and we're going to go for a French Pilsner. And so what is more French than a Kronenbourg 1664? Well, it turned out to be quite a tricky recipe to pin down. This is very much then inspired by a French Pilsner and is my very own Clonenbourg 2024. Welcome. This is the Homebrew Masterplan with 15 homebrews aligned to 15 special events throughout the year. Last month the Dunkel German Dark Lager was ready for the Euros and was a winner, unlike the football team. This month though, things went a bit awry and it was all my own fault, and I've made the same mistake before. Lesson not learned clearly. Despite ordering exactly the right amount of ingredients, I had some left over at the end. That should have been a warning sign, but it wasn't. It's exactly the same as what happens when I order flat packed furniture. It never ends well. Enjoy the chaos and see if we have an Olympic champion beer, an Eddie the Eagle, good effort, still enjoyable, or one that I should simply have left back at home base. Starting with the ingredients then, we have nearly 2.5 kilograms of grain. That's made up of 1.99 kilograms of floor malted Bohemian Pilsner malt, 248 grams of flaked rice, 142 grams of dark Munich malt, 53 grams of acidulated malt. We are going to need 69 grams of Strisel spelt hops, a full packet of the Lallemand Diamond Lager yeast, 2 grams of Irish moss, 5 grams of yeast nutrient, and finally 142 grams of honey. For water, I favour the Ashbeck water because of its low mineral content. We're going to need 15.2 litres for this recipe. The water chemistry gives us a lager profile, for which we're going to need half a gram of baking soda, 0.1 gram of calcium chloride, 0.2 grams of chalk, 0.1 gram of Epsom salt, 0.2 grams of gypsum, and we'll check the lactic acid once we get to that stage. Moving on to the equipment, my brew kettle is actually an Aldi mulled wine warmer which cost about 30 quid and has had a few modifications. You can check out the link above for some of the fun and games I've had there. Additionally, we're going to need a 10 litre fermentation bucket, and since this is a boil in the bag recipe, we'll also need a large bag and clips. After that, we're on to miscellaneous other paraphernalia such as thermometers, pH meter, hydrometer, refractometer, measuring cylinder and scales. Now this recipe calls for 15.2 litres of water, which implies we need to do a top up, but I think we can just about get away with it. So I'm going to wing it, not do a top up, and put the full quantity of water in. Having added the 15.2 litres of bottled water, it's now time to turn on the water heater and bring up to a strike temperature of 68 degrees centigrade. While the water's heating up, it's time to sort out the water chemicals. Now we're going for a lager profile. Having measured out the water chemicals, mix them in. This is a brew in the bag recipe, so we're going to get the bag ready for mashing in. Strike temperature is 70, mash temperature is 67. I am not going to go quite as high as 70 because it does hold its heat really well. Okay, just shy of 70, so that's good enough. We have reached temperature, so we're going to add the grains and give them a good mix to make sure there's no clumping. Now, spoiler warning, the grains are actually about 700 grams light of floor malted Bohemian Pilsner. We're going to have to see what impact that's going to have later on. It's time to seal up the bag, and we're going to mash for 60 minutes at 67 degrees centigrade. 15 minutes in, we're going to take a sample to check the pH level. Placing the measuring cylinder into a large cup of cold water works to cool down the wort to room temperature very quickly. At 15 minutes the refractometer is giving us a reading of 1.041, which is a bit odd because it's very high and higher than the reading we're going to get later on. The hydrometer reading meanwhile comes in at 1.042, just one gravity point different. pH meanwhile has come in at 5.28, perfectly in range, so no lactic acid is required. The hour is up and it is time to raise the temperature to bring it up to a boil. We can now also remove the bag and let that drain. We are also going to take a sample for our pre-boil gravity reading. 91 degrees, almost there. The wort has cooled down to room temperature and we're going to compare the refractometer to the hydrometer reading. First step, clean the lens on the refractometer. The refractometer is coming in at 1.037. Meanwhile, the hydrometer 1.039. That's 2 gravity points higher than we're seeing on the refractometer. The temperature has reached boiling point and we will now start a rolling boil. As is pretty typical, I'm going to try a little bit of an experiment because my chiller is never going to get this down to the appropriate pitching rate of 12 degrees C. So what I'm going to do, rather than use a chiller, is transfer to the bucket, put it straight in the fridge and monitor it there until it comes down to pitching temperature and then pitch the yeast. It also means slightly less cleanup. I can't see any issue with this approach, but do tell me if you think there is. This is the hop spider to allow us to add our first set of hops. Our 60-minute hop addition then is 23 grams of Strisselspalt. This is giving us 7 IBUs of bitterness. At 30 minutes we're going to add a further 23 grams of Strisselspalt, this time giving us just 5 IBUs of bitterness. We are coming up to the 10-minute mark and at this point we have lots of additions to add. Starting with another 23 grams of Strisselspalt, this time adding just 2 IBUs. We also have 2 grams of Irish moss for clarity, 5 grams of yeast nutrient, and finally 143 grams of honey. Not sure of the best method here to mix this all in, so we'll just give it a bit of a swizz. That's a technical term. The boil is over, and because of our experimental cooling method there is no need for the chiller, but it is time to take a sample for the original gravity. The quick release connectors are very handy and we're simply going to transfer the hot wort into the fermentation bucket. We did have a little left over in the brew kettle at the end of transfer. Right, I've got to get that down to 12 degrees. Right, I'm just going to cover this up for transportation as we're going to cool it in the fridge. You need to come out of here. Now, this did not work quite as well as I hoped, and in fact, for a while I warmed up the fridge rather than the fridge cool down the wort. It's now time for cleanup. The hop spider in particular was a good challenge for cleaning. On this occasion my Aldi mulled wine warmer cleaned it up very nicely. The grains left over at the end still have a wonderfully delicious aroma. It's time to take a reading, and we've come out a little off target. We've hit 1.042 versus a target of 1.050. This is due to the fact I'm 700 grams short on the floor malted Bohemian Pilsner, but I only realised it at this stage when the gravity was so low. The refractometer was even worse, coming in at 1.037. The starting temperature when we put it in the fridge was at 80 degrees centigrade. 18 hours later and we're down to 14 degrees centigrade. However, it did require a bottle of frozen water to be added to the fridge to try to help bring that temperature down. In actual fact, after about an hour, I'd simply warmed the fridge up and nothing else had materially changed. It is time to pitch the yeast, and our choice of yeast on this occasion is the Lallemand Diamond Lager yeast. Now this has a very neutral aroma and flavour, perfect for lagers with a high attenuation range of up to 83%. Its alcohol tolerance is also very high. Although we're not aiming for this sort of level, it can go up to 13% ABV. Having pitched the yeast, it's time to make sure it's thoroughly mixed in, and we can now put it away for fermentation. For fermentation, we have 3 weeks in the Ferminator at 11 degrees centigrade. Well, off on holidays for a week, so we'll just have to wait and see. Our plan today is to bottle carbonate, and we're going to go 2 ways. We'll put 5 litres into a barrel and then put the remainder into bottles. Our first step though is to make sure that we've thoroughly cleaned and sanitised everything that we're going to use today. It's day 21, and back at the Ferminator we can check out how things have been getting along. At the bottom of the bucket you can see the trub there that's settled at the bottom, and you can still see positive pressure in the airlock. But it's time for the big reveal. How does it look? The honey aroma's coming through, but so are those earthy notes, presumably from the hops. The maximum amount of sugar for the 5 litre barrel is 18 grams, so we're going to mix that up in a sugar wash and add that to the barrel before we start to transfer. For transfer we're going to move 5 litres straight into the barrel and then the remainder to a jug so we can calculate the amount of sugar needed to carbonate. Give it a blast of CO2. This step of adding the seal to the barrel is usually pretty complicated. However, I seem to have really got away with it on this occasion. Easy peasy. Right, this is 4 litres. We are looking for a high level of carbonation in this drink, so that's 9 grams of sugar per litre. 36 grams in total. We're going to mix this up in a sugar wash to make sure it dissolves thoroughly throughout the whole of the wort before we move to the bottles. We will transfer to the bottles using a bottling wand, and we have ended up with 3.5 litres in the bottle. In bottle and barrel then we have 8.5 litres, which we now need to put away to carbonate. To keep that temperature nice and stable at 12 degrees centigrade, I'm going to move the bottles and the barrel to the Ferminator. Ah yes, it's now my least favourite step, cleanup. It's time to take a final gravity reading, and we've come in at 1.011 versus a target of 1.009. This is slightly higher than expected, so it has reduced our ABV further. The ABV target was 5.4%, and after correcting for the difference in OG and FG, we've come in at 5.1%. The Ferminator has kept the temperature really stable throughout the whole of fermentation, but now it's time to bring the temperature down a little further, and for that I'm going to move it to the fridge. Ferminator's off. Ooh, clarity looks good. Fingers crossed on carbonation. Well, cold crashing to help with clarity, but to be fair, I don't think it's much of an issue. Ferminator gets some time off for a little while. It's time to evaluate the Clonenbourg 2024. It's been lovely and clear in the fridge. You can see there's some yeast at the bottom there. So hopefully it's carbonated. Let's open it and see. few bubbles there. Wow, we are looking promising. Lovely and clear. Lovely head. I can smell the aroma from here. I noticed some earthy notes previously, and that actually comes from the floor malted Bohemian Pilsner. Definitely got the honey. The malts alone should be sweet and give us something of a biscuit aroma. Definitely get that sweetness of malt. Okay, I am actually looking forward to tasting this one. I was a bit worried, it comes in about 4%. Let's give it a try. It wasn't quite what we were going for, but it's come out really, really well. So first, on mouthfeel. Very much in the style, very much in the very light on the mouthfeel. Carbonation, just about right. And on flavour, it is a bit light on flavour. Those missing malts do make a bit of a difference, I'm sure. However, it is still a very refreshing drink. There is a small bitterness on the aftertaste, and that comes, I think, from the Munich malt. It's not sharp, it is just a very refreshing bite. Now the hops, which I thought would have a bigger effect given that we were a bit light on grains, I'm not particularly getting any hoppy aroma. There should be just an undercurrent of floral or maybe a little citrus. I am getting the honey, but not the citrus. The Strisel spelt hops just have such a very low alpha acid. I was hoping that the higher quantity of hops would have meant we would have had perhaps a little bit more hoppy flavour to it. However, that is not the style of a French Pilsner. Well, it does come down to the resilience of the brew that this turned out to be perfectly in style despite a couple of errors on the ingredients. End result, pretty good. Cheers everyone, and do like and subscribe. Happy homebrewing. So in the final analysis, not quite an Olympic brew, but certainly a quaffable summer drink. The bottles turned out surprisingly great, but it's time to turn our attention to the barrel. Aroma good, clarity good, carbonation a bit lighter. Yeah, carbonation much lighter. That could be a factor of a bit more time. Flavour, just as good. Same finish. I always do like a bit more carbonation though, so slightly prefer the bottom. Despite leaving it for another week and there being a good healthy release of CO2 when the barrels are first opened, it still didn't achieve carbonation. This being a good opportunity for a bit of an experiment, I've dug out my 2-litre mini keg and seeing if we can avoid oxidization and add a bit of carbonation. To see if that was successful, you are going to have to tune in a few weeks' time for the retrospective. The Homebrew Masterplan has passed the halfway mark with 8 in the bag and 7 to go. However, things have taken a turn for the worst and I'm already worried about 2 of the upcoming brews. Equipment failure, my wonderful Aldi Mull wine warmer has gone to the great brew kettle in the sky. This means that I've had to nurse through my next brew. That'll be interesting in the next video up for the Blue Moon clone. And in a bit of trouble now for the 2 after that. It's exciting here, isn't it?